what I'm going to do to start off with, I mean, we're going to have a discussion about some things that have become very popular this year, and just have a debate in certain cases about certain nitty-gritties about this subject. So before we start, I think we should introduce ourselves, and I'm going to request the lady to go first.
Hey everybody, I'm Selena Larson. I'm a senior cybersecurity analyst, threat intelligence analyst at Proofpoint, focused on cybercrime. And Michael is joking that this is my favorite topic because I'm sick of it. I am so tired of hearing about AI and all the hype around it. So I'm very excited to today hopefully talk about practical applications and the reality of the current threat landscape.
All right. Hi, my name is Abhishek, and I am a senior director with McAfee. I manage the global threat research and response intelligence operations for McAfee. I've been in this industry for many years. I worked through some really important cyber incidents, starting from Aurora, Saudi Aramco, you name it. But more recently, I've moved to the consumer side of McAfee, and so now we're looking at, threats, scams. How do we deal with consumer-related threats, which from the last talk, as you can tell, is quite big, and we're thinking about how we can use AI in some cases to solve some of these problems. So yeah, I think this will be an exciting talk.
Let's hope so. So, so my name is Samir Mody, and I'm the VP of Threat Research at K7, a company based in Chennai, in India. I'm not going to say very much more. I mean, my background is a lot in sort of, research and reverse engineering stuff. So that is kind of perspective that I'm going to bring into this. So before we start, AI and ML and NLP and so on, these are things which have been around for a long time. And we've actually talked about them in conferences before, probably for the last 5 or 6 years. So what's different now? So who wants to go first? Maybe you can go first.
So that's a good question. So AI has been evolving, and we call it AI, ML, whatever you call it. I think AI is a very broad and overused term anyway, but it's evolving. And what has changed in the last 1 year is quite dramatic, especially for NLP. So I don't think NLP still remains the same. We still need to process languages. It's how you do it. We used to do it using RNNs. We used to do it using, long short-term memory. So you have these architectures, right? And what has changed now is the new architecture, which was introduced a few years ago, which is called the transformer architecture. So how it's different from RNNs because it's not taking information sequentially, right? And so the approach has changed because it's more contextual. It's more relatable. It's solving problems in NLP that have not been done before. And and so yes, and from the cybersecurity side, well, that opens a whole avenue for good and for bad, right? And so I think that's what we want to talk about. So, Selena.
Yeah, I'm not wanting to add very much, but does anyone remember Tay AI from Microsoft? You guys remember that? Oh man, that was a while ago now. I don't know, 2016 maybe. But it was like a chat bot, right? And it was like so much hype around Tay AI, all of this chatbot stuff. And what ended up happening was people gamed the system. And so it ended up going to a very dark place. And Microsoft ended up basically pulling Tay out. I was like, we are not ready for chatbots. Now is not the time for this. Now, though, what we see is a lot more of this sort of assistive artificial, I don't like calling it, whatever. Yeah, chat assistance. And that is being able to be scaled now, whereas previously it was things like Microsoft and Google and other companies that had the ability to do all this. But now it's democratizing LLMs in a way that we just haven't previously seen.
So, you want to
one more question. And I think what Selena said is right. So what was different? Like, you've seen deepfakes like 5 years ago, right? It's not new. But what has changed is that now you can buy it as a service. You can go online and create a voice clone. It costs literally nothing, like $10 a month for 1,000 clones. And these softwares have gotten really, really good. And it's available for everyone to use. So I think that is where the challenge lies, is that how this is abused and how do we as an organization slash industry deal with what's about to come.
So what you guys are saying is that kind of the barrier to entry is a lot lower now, and the quality is much higher. So basically, if you were to implement a lot of these kind of models yourself, it would actually take a really long time, a lot of expense, and you probably won't get right. But here you have something, not just ChatGPT. You could have Bard or whatever. You have a very high quality sort of infrastructure to give you lots of content, which is quite difficult to distinguish from what between a machine and a human. So
It's been commoditized, essentially, right? So what's happening is that Google and all these big companies are making models available as a commodity. Like, you don't have to be an AI expert. If you had to implement an AI ML model a few years ago, you had to you had to get training data, separate out the good and the bad, then put it through a learning. Yeah, yeah. Spend some time, build a big team. You don't have to do that anymore. Like, these models are available for use, and they are very general, right? They've been generalized to the point where you can fine tune them in many ways, right? You can fine tune them either through, like, you can take off the head of the neural network and put your own head on it, and therefore you can fine tune it that way. Or to make it simple, what we do on ChatGPT, right? We prompt train it. So you can prompt train these like never before. And so you don't have to invest a lot of time. 20 years ago, my dad used to work with the USAF, and he had told me that there's this one gentleman in the Air Force who is extremely good at finding stuff on the internet. He can Google it, and anytime we have a question, we go to him, and he tells us what the right Googling is. How do you Google it? And that's what's happening with AI today. You have to just figure out how to prompt train, and you can get a bunch of information. You can fine tune it as a result of that. So it's that easy. You don't have to be an expert.
So before we go to the next section, I think I'm going to tell you guys a joke, right? So last year I heard this fantastic joke, right, which goes something like this: ML is written in Python, but AI is written in PowerPoint. Okay, so with that, I think it is important for us to actually understand what is the scope of hype in a lot of these things that we talk about AI. I personally feel that there are certain things which are definitely viable and there are opportunities in this space, but there's a lot of other stuff which is spewed out by people who don't necessarily understand exactly what they're talking about, frankly. And that's why we've got experts on the panel who are going to tell us where the hype is and what they think about that. I think, Selena, you can go first.
Yeah, so Proofpoint, obviously we live very big in this email security space. And I'm frequently asked, how is AI going to change email lures? Let me tell you. While we do see some that we suspect are AI generated content, it's the same thing that has been going on for a really long time. We currently use machine learning in a lot of our detection engines already. So both human generated as well as ML types of content to identify very specific language, for example, around fraud for business email compromise. Our Supernova engine, for example, is ML powered, and we have been able to very easily identify and block on certain terms or certain themes or the sort of tone of an email. So there's a lot of these characteristics that for a long time have been really successful and have been used over and over again. If you look at AI generated content that's used for fraud and used for phishing, guess what words they're using? Guess what tone they're using? Guess what, the content that's being included is basically exactly the same. In some cases, it's a really long email, and which I find very funny because who has the time to read like 10 paragraphs of send me money? So in that case, I think that, the stuff that we're seeing that's AI generated, it's just the same stuff that humans have been writing. So what's interesting is the potential ability to scale that, make some slight changes, maybe use LLMs to sort of follow an existing blueprint that you already have. But I think some of the concern about AI generated content specifically in terms of using it as lures is a little bit overblown because social engineering is going to be effective It exists right now. Where I do think that some of the AI generated content might be interesting and a little bit more impactful is things like fraud on like social impact stuff on Facebook, on Twitter, sort of being able to scale out a lot of these information operations. So automating responses, automating engagement on public channels, things that are kind of reactive and responsive to the ecosystem and the community itself. But there we aren't seeing a ton of that yet, but we do know that information operations are super effective, and being able to maybe scale that more effectively and have more unique content, I think is interesting. But from a phishing perspective and a lore perspective, the language is the same. And let me tell you, having a thread hijacked email that's just like, here's the document, can be very effective social engineering too. Still. Yeah, still. And that's, we see that a lot too.
Yeah, when you talk about hype, like, I think people go, ballistic, right? They think about, oh, AI is going to take over the world, humans are going to be, no, that's way off, right? Like, there are practical aspects of this where it will be used, and there are some impractical ones which you don't have to worry about. So let's talk about security, right? So yes, there will be an impact on security. Scam is not new. In fact, scams and spam detection is one of the first applications of ML in our industry, right? So it's not like spam. Again, it did it on NLP, it did it on text, and so it's been around for a while. Yes, the type of spam will evolve, the volume will evolve. I think somebody mentioned that the number of comments on websites has been going up. Fake reviews, yeah, that could happen because you can very easily change the language and make it difficult. Let's talk about us, like from a security point of view. Besides scams and spam and phishing, there are some real consequences. Like, you can create polymorphic code like you never did before, right? And what that means is that you can, on the fly, create code not only in like what we do today for obfuscation, etc. is the same. It's ways of changing the register. It is ways you compress, decompress, small things like that, some small changes where you can still figure it out. But I feel that attackers might take that to the next level. They could create a framework where you can build the same output of the code, but you can build it in VB, and then you can build it in C++ and C#. So there is that inherent obfuscation which is now being introduced, which you've not seen before. So, so I see that some of that will evolve, and that is sort of the challenge we'll face. But on the other hand, it's also a tool for us. I mean, I think it gives us, as security researchers, there's always a balance, because they figured out something. I mean, it's going to be useful to us in many ways. So I think there's definitely some hype, but there is going to be practical cases in security. There's going to be practical solutions in security as well.
So we're going to come back to that in a sec. My personal views about the code stuff, there has been, in my opinion, quite a lot of hype about ChatGPT being able to write code and malware at that. You're shaking your head, you know what I'm talking about. So I mean, I've actually looked at the kind of code that's generated, and it won't even compile probably, and is probably not going to have the context that's required to actually execute in the environment that it's supposed to execute in. So I'm not sure about, I don't think I completely agree with you, Abhishek, about the ability to cross compile stuff between different types of backgrounds. But I mean, we'll wait and see. But one interesting point which I actually saw, in a presentation just before lunch, was a chap who was describing how a targeted attack, which originates in, let's say, North Korea, can actually span many days of benign email conversations with the target before you actually give them the boom factor, right? So I'm pretty sure you're going to agree with me on this. I'm going to ask you anyway, Selena. Do you think that that kind of conversation can be very much aided by ChatGPT and so on?
I'm so glad you brought that up. It's almost as if we planned it. Yes. So that is really interesting. So benign conversations, from both the attacker perspective as well as the defense perspective. From the attacker perspective, we are actually seeing an increase in benign conversations. This used to be very much sort of the space where APTs played a very long game, building trust with their attacker, very targeted. But we've also started seeing from a threat actor perspective, even like the e-crime activity, definitely BEC, definitely things like pig butchering, where you have a conversation, you build up trust with the user before the ultimate objective is obtained. So it used to be pretty interesting to see it from the APT side of things. I mean, they go months. I mean, North Korea, Iranian threat actors, like months and months before they will like send you malware. So it's interesting that that's kind of like leaking over to the e-crime side of the house. And I do think that that is one potential application. However, as a state actor, you have the time, the resources, and the ability to independently craft this stuff. You need to know your target. You have to know what to say, what they're going to fall for, be strategic about the stuff that you're saying. So I don't actually see APT actors using ChatGPT like that. Where I do see it would be scamming. Things like pig butchering, things like the sort of like benign conversations that we've seen with some of our e-crime threat actors that deliver stuff like Bumblebee, ICE, things like that. And on the defense side, my friend and I actually were working on this little prototype where from a threat researcher perspective, it's so hard to constantly be replying to these benign emails, be like, okay, I want to get the Bitcoin wallet, or I want to get the phishing link, I want to get the attachment, but oh my gosh, it's such a time suck to have to like reply to this guy. Oh my God. So we're thinking, okay, could we create something where maybe it's bot to bot, because maybe they're using the exact same thing, right? Like, but can we sort of craft a tool where it's like an auto reply to these actors? So we're having a conversation and they're thinking they're talking to a person, and then finally we get the payload. So all that stuff happens without any input from me. And then I just want to see what the end result is. And yes, what do you want from me? And so if we're able to kind of get that and to basically scale ourselves as researchers, I think that's a very cool and potentially useful application. Of course, on the flip side, they could maybe be doing the same thing. But if we can use that for good and then just kind of suck in all the indicators that our auto replier has been able to collect, then we have all of this like new data set that really cut down on the time and effort that was required from us to get it.
So basically you're saying it's not that useful for sophisticated attacks because they don't need to do that, and they need to actually be pretty convincing, and you're not convinced that ChatGPT can do that as of now. But Abhishek, how do you think that the industry, from your perspective, can use this same technology for our benefit?
Yeah, so before I get to that, I just one thing I want to say about APT attacks is that a lot of APT attacks start because of social engineering, right? And so there was a recent article, and I think some researcher from Microsoft or Bing or tried this. He did something called prompt injection, okay, and he basically was able to inject into a conversation that an LLM was having with somebody, and use that as a mechanism to demonstrate that you can do a phishing attack. Like in the middle of the conversation, once you build trust, you can actually get their phone number, get their email addresses. So when you get into these conversations with these LLMs, like you might see some of these threat tactics evolve, right? Like prompt injection could be a thing where people inject and get information out of that person, which can also lead to PII. So the question, going back to how do we protect against this, right? I'm seeing that some companies are trying to build tools based on LLMs to help SecOps. For example, I think CrowdStrike has something called Huntress, if I'm not mistaken, right? And so, but I haven't seen them to be very useful at this point. Like, because these LLMs are not where we want them to be, they hallucinate, which can actually make it a nightmare for SecOps, okay? But I see that we're moving in that direction. It'll take some time, but there will be better understanding of prompt engineering and fine-tuning, and it'll be more adapted to what you need. For example, Google has something called, I'm forgetting the name, but they have a SecPalm model. Has anybody heard of SecPalm? Okay, so they have their Palm model, which is an LLM. They're trying to create a SecPalm, which is trained on VirusTotal data, which is more security related, right? And it hasn't, like, it's, again, I've played with it. It's not where we want it to be, right? But it'll get there. And when it gets there, then you'll be able to get a lot of information out of it. For example, if I have been given a buffer of information, or like in the last presentation, they were showing functions. You can ask the LLM at least a question about, hey, can you tell me what this function does? And it'll be able to interpret it for you in some way that you want back. So you could actually, in their use case, they were converting it to, for similarity reasons, right? To compare similar functions. But you could actually learn from the LLM, convert it to features, and do a whole different thing on it, or describe a function. I mean, think about how much effort that would save a security researcher. Like, instead of having to reverse engineer every function, maybe you can get some help. And I've seen it work decently well. I expect it to do better as we train it on the right data, right? So those are some of the positive applications that I see that will be useful. Selena, I like your example. Yes, you can. So, by the way, we're already seeing commercialization of LLMs. People are doing advertisements and deepfakes. It's not in the bad sense, like, for advertising specific shops in specific locations. So the same guy is speaking, but he talks about a different shop every time, right? So I see a lot of that happening in our space, in the deepfake land. But again, in security, there might be other applications of chatbots which can help, because one of the biggest challenges in our industry is explaining threats. Like, how do you explain a threat in simple terms to a person? They don't understand T1005, like, that's for SecOps, right? To make it simple for people to understand, yes, you might want to use LLMs. You could use that to make it simple and just sort of dumb it down depending on what your level is, right? So I see some of those applications.
Can I share my favorite AI tool? So we have a tool, I don't know if it's really, it's more machine learning, right? But at Proofpoint is called Camp Disco. And it's basically, yeah, exactly. It's a party. And basically what it is, it's a malware clustering engine based on, it's based on BERT, but we created our own language built on BERT, basically our own LLM to cluster malware. Because right now the existing language models don't speak malware, so to speak, right? So they're trained on like a corpus of data that doesn't include like the language of malware. So our data science team ended up like building this entire new model that then they made this tool called Camp Disco. It automatically clusters related threats based off of a variety of characteristics like PowerShell commands, malware, hashes, URLs, whatever, IPC2s, and it'll kind of show in an analyst dashboard, these are sets of likely related threats. File names is one of my favorite ones to kind of look at clustered file names because you see a lot of really interesting stuff. But man, that thing has saved me so much time. Like, I go into our dashboard, I look at clusters of related activity, and it's like it would take me, hours, if not days, to find some of this stuff in our data. Whereas this little ML just like surfaces it automatically. So we've been able to find really, really novel threats from this data set because it's kind of like a threat research assistant, right? So it's kind of getting like the wheat from the chaff and presenting you with possibilities where then you as a threat researcher can take that data that's already pre-clustered and then do analysis on it and pivot. And it's been like pretty game changing for our team. And this is where I think ML and AI tools are super useful. It's like being like an Intel assistant or a SOC assistant where, it's like, okay, can we take a look at some of the like the data? Can we write like automated Yara rule creation or automated sort of detections based off of behavioral characteristics? And that's what really excites me about some of this stuff is not like the super, it's going to be a human being, but like, it's going to make my life easier. Like, it's going to do the boring work for me so I can focus on the fun stuff. But yeah, that's what gets me excited.
So, I mean, that's what, from what you're saying, it actually, we agree that ML is a tool which is very powerful and very useful. And as long as you understand the limitations, that's fine. So, I mean, one of my colleagues from work, he had shown me what is before I even got a ChatGPT account, by the way, it was his sort of output that convinced me that I should do this, because what he did was he's a pretty technical guy, right? But he wanted to know some more information about how to use a particular API and a certain strategy, and he actually put that in, and he actually came out with lots of committed code which is always somewhere on the internet, but it's difficult for us to find it. So clearly, this is more like a glorified Google, right? But that's what we should look at it as of now. It's a great tool to reduce the amount of time that you would spend on this stuff. But there are costs, right? And I think that's where we want to go to now towards the close of this panel. There have been concerns over some time about the ethics related to and the risks associated with the use of LLMs and that kind of technology. I wanted to, I think I'll go to you first, Abhishek, about your thoughts on what the dangers are, especially from a cybersecurity perspective, because we've seen what happens in other industries. And we don't want to go down that same hole, do we? So what are your thoughts?
So yeah, that's a good one. So there's a lot of things that we need to think about as an industry. Like there will be adversarial attacks on these models. It's going to happen, right? And those will be in terms of prompt training. So yes, some of these companies are putting guardrails around their models, okay, and we're trying to think about how to do regulation for these, which is great, okay. But the bad guys are not going to do that. They don't care. They'll figure out their own models. They don't want guardrails. They don't want things like that. So from their point of view, they'll have their own stuff. From our point of view, we have to figure out how to make, like, think about like when we do Google searches, you have robots.txt, right, which tells you that, oh, don't go and parse this page. Right, so you tell Google, the parser, that don't do it. We need something similar like that for ML. We need to tell it that, hey, I don't want you to include this in your training, because that could lead to PII. PII could be extracted out of the model through an adversarial attack, and so that's one thing. And probably ways to prevent it, now that I'm talking about, is like we have to make it more expensive for the adversary. Like, how do we make the cost to use any of these models or try to attack us, make it more expensive?
Yeah, and I would add to that too, from like an ethics sort of perspective. We've seen what has happened with algorithms on social media. There's actually a number of really interesting studies done on Facebook, for example, having algorithmic-based feeds cause offline problems. A really interesting example is in Myanmar a few years ago. There was a lot of violence in that country, and the Facebook algorithm was basically weighing some content heavier than others, and so pushing it up in the feed, and it was kind of, causing some of these problems. There's actually some UN activity that ended up happening, but I think we have to learn from that use case of the dangers of technology and automated systems and prevent that for our AI in the future.
Wait, I think I'm not sure we have time. Oh, but we're actually out of time. So if you would like to thank the panel, so that's Selena and Abhishek. Thank you very much for your time, and well done.